Hello and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Leah and this is True Crime and Beauty on Tuesdays. Every Tuesday I do an upload on some type of true crime that I've been thinking about or that has come through on my Google search. Once you start Googling things like different murders or criminals that have to go with movies, a lot of things tend to pop up, surprisingly. And today we'll be addressing the movie From Hell with Johnny Depp in it, which is based on Jack the Ripper. Today's True Crime and Beauty on Tuesday revolves around probably one of the most well-known, if not the most well-known serial killer that still to this day we don't really know if he was ever actually apprehended or if he just happened to pass away at some point in time in his life, knowing full well that he committed some of the most gruesome and horrific murders ever. So grab a snack and then sit back and relax and let me tell you a story. Today we're going to also be delving into my Dominique Cosmetic palettes, and I'm going to try to use just the palettes for multitasking purposes so you can see what they can actually do. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's take a leap back, okay? Leap back in time. Say we have a time machine and we can just jump on in that time machine, and we're going to take a leap back to 1888 to a place that is well known. You know it, I know it. It's London, England. During this time in London, England, it was like a surge of importance in this place. It became like really prominent. I mean, when we think about London, or at least when I think about London, I think about Windsor Palace, the Queen of England, and some of my lineage, to be honest. A lot of my lineage is buried over there. Like, I have like lineage that dates back to Mary Queen of Scots and Queen Elizabeth, you know, the first, Henry VIII's daughter, you know, that guy. Anyways, so that's what I think about when I think back and think on London. But during this time, London was like growing. This was in the industrial age. It was considered the largest city in the world. It was also considered the world's largest port and the heart of the international financial and trade. Railways were going up everywhere, so people could be connected all over the place. I mean, it was booming. Naturally, places would be expanding because of all the newcomers that are coming into town. New businesses meant new financial opportunities, which meant new people. Just growing opportunities and growing wealth, to be honest. Britain was like going through an entire change. Even like a modern day sewage system was being installed. Like, think toilets, people, okay? Like, this is a big deal. At least I'd be thinking it was a big deal. Kind of like having a toilet in the house, you know? Not only was it the largest city, but it was actually considered to be the capital of the British Empire, and with its population escalating from 1 million to 5.5 million within this time, it was 5 times larger than New York City at the time. Needless to say, the industrial age was all over London, and it was just flourishing and becoming what we know now. Big events were naturally happening during this time. Events like in January, Lawn Tennis Association was founded. February, first issue of the Financial Times goes on sale. These are starting to be like big things that are getting established, and we're moving forward in this age. In March, there was a meeting to discuss an establishment of football league. April began the Lions to New Zealand and Australia. In May, the royal opening of the International Exhibition of Science, Art, and Industry opened. And for color base, we're going to use the Dare to Be Bright Ballerina primer for our eyes. In June, going on throughout the year. In June, Edward King is called to an account for using ritualistic practices in Anglican worship. So as you can see, things are like, there are big events that are happening throughout 1888. And I'm really just naming a few, just so you guys get an idea. July 2nd began the London Match Girl strike. Now this was a strike that went on for a little while, and it followed like some the firing of some colleagues of these girls. Also, they were protesting like the working conditions at this match company called Bryant and Kay. And some of you guys may have heard about that one, because that one was like a bigger one in history that even us over here probably knew them. In August, now this one I had to read a bunch of times, so I just kind of summarized it. Basically, it made taking oaths important and mandatory, basically. You know how like the president takes an oath in office, you know, to do the best he can and that kind of thing. Yeah, that's what this was. It was passed that oaths were important and that they had to be taken. They were mandatory. In September, Charles Turner became the first bowler that was in cricket. I didn't know guys that played cricket were called bowlers as well. I just thought bowlers were for bowling, but you learn something new every day. He was the first bowler in cricket to take 250 wicket in an English season. I'm guessing that's a huge thing. I don't really know much about cricket at all. If you do, you can explain it to me in the comment. In October, the Salt Union Ltd. formed to achieve and effectively monopoly over the British salt production. So they like wanted it all. They took it all. In November, Belfast, we've probably heard of that, Belfast is granted status of a city by Queen Victoria. In December, John Boyd Dunlap patented the pneumatic bicycle tire for his child's tricycle. So I mean, tricycles, right? That's important. So a lot of these were really important and even history-changing events. I mean, they all were really history-changing events in their own way. But many of them were overshadowed by a particular set of events that seemed to unfold in the same area and in the same time frame. And that was the Whitechapel murders. Now, the Whitechapel murders, people have bounced around with names when it came to, you know, Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper is the name of, or the self-proclaimed name, which I'll address later, of the person who did the murdering. But the Whitechapel murders was the area in which these murders were happening. And there are mixed reviews on saying that all the Whitechapel murders were because of Jack the Ripper, and then there are other reviews saying that, well, he didn't commit all of these murders, that these were just some of the district murders, and they just happened to happen in the same time frame that Jack the Ripper was doing his murdering spree. Okay. So the Whitechapel murders was kind of a blanket addressing of all of them. So we're going to go ahead and do a quick warning. Some of these are excessively graphic. Like, really, I had to cut out some of the details because it gets really graphic in a lot of the research that I've done. There are also pictures of the women who had been passed away. Some of them are drawings, which really weren't bad, but some of them are actually photographs of the women after the murders, and I don't think I should post those here because I would literally have to just blur out the entire picture. So if you want to look that up, go ahead, because there are pictures, and some of the ones that were the most brutal, there are pictures of. So if that interests you, go ahead and you can check those out after the video. But I didn't feel like I should be putting those up. But there are pictures. I'll post some pictures on here like I usually do. But as far as those, I will avoid. I'm just going to go ahead and jump on in. The first Whitechapel murder that happened was Emma Elizabeth Smith. And it is said that she was attacked by 2 to 3 men. This is why they don't believe that it was one of Jack the Ripper's actual murders, but one can't really be sure considering the amount of murders that he did. Now, I have done other ones that have had way more amounts of murders, but I almost want to say that these are the most gruesome that I have gone through so far. Miss Emma Elizabeth was pretty tight-lipped about her history and her past. She really didn't talk much about it, but people knew that she was a widow, and not just a widow, but like they had been separated, and then he passed away. And there was no wrongful doing in that situation. He passed away. There was no murder or anything like that. So when he did pass, they were separated. Though she was in more of a lower class area, people couldn't help but think that at some point in time she had experienced the higher side of life, because there was just a vibe about her that she had some culture, she had some class to her. She wasn't just like your everyday, like, Whitechapel prostitute that was hanging around. There was just something more to her. And on April 3rd, she was actually brutally attacked, like I said, by 2 to 3 men. She really could not say and describe the men, other than the fact that she believed that one of them was a teenager. And though she was taken to the London hospital, she did succumb to her injuries after she had sought a doctor, had surgery. They didn't have the ability to really find out all the injuries. It was just it was still up and coming. And it turns out that she had been vaginally sodomized by some blunt force object. And it had been such a violent sodomizing that it had ruptured her peritoneum and led to internal bleeding. So she had fallen into a coma and then later died the next day. They did decide that her actual death was a murder, which I'm glad, because 2 to 3 men attacked her. But they never were able to really find who did it, or at least that's what they believe. They couldn't find who did it. Just some months later, in the fall, August 7th, a second victim was found, and her name was Martha Tabram. Martha was born in Southwark, London, and she was the youngest of 5 siblings. She got married to a gentleman named Henry, but Martha, she liked the alcohol. So it was a very tumultuous type of marriage, and it was kind of trouble from the beginning. Though they did have their own struggles, they did manage to have 2 children from this marriage. After that, her drinking really came into play, and they did end up separating. And one thing I've noticed with this case is that separation was a huge thing in every single murder. Like, every single woman had been married and separated, pretty much, like, every single woman. I want to say every single woman, but we'll go through it and you'll see what I'm talking about. It was like a theme. I don't know if that was something that he was targeting or not, but it was definitely a theme. So Miss Martha was separated, and she ended up living off and on with a gentleman, like a boyfriend, off and on up until about 3 weeks before her murder. The night of her murder, she was out on a drunken bender. She was just having a heyday, doing her thing. And, well, she's probably really thinking, like, maybe I should have stayed home. Like, probably mid-murder, she was thinking, I should have just stayed home. I can almost bet you money that's what she was thinking, because that's what would have been going through my head. Then later on, in the early hours of the morning, she was found in the landing area of the first flight of stairs of a building, obviously of a building. And she had been stabbed at an excess of 39 times. I was floored. Like I said, these are some really brutal murders. 39 times. Not 38, not 37, but 39. Alone, she had been stabbed 9 times in her neck. And it was so deep that it actually reached her spinal cord. She had been stabbed 5 times in the left lung and 2 times in the right lung. Once in the heart, which probably would have just done it. He didn't have to go through all the extras, but yeah. 5 times in the liver, 2 times in the spleen, and that would have done her in anyways, because once you bust your spleen open, you're going to bleed out if you don't get it taken care of immediately. 6 times in the stomach. There were also wounds found in her abdomen and her genitals. Yeah, that's also a theme too, so get ready, buckle up, okay? Though her body was positioned in a graphically lewd and sexual manner, there was no sexual assault found to be done on her. And of course, as you can probably guess, she was declared dead there, and the death was considered a murder, obviously, because it wasn't natural forces that killed her. Not long after, in the same month, just at the end, August 31st of 1888, and this was the body of Ann Nichols. This is the one that they really believe is the true first victim of Jack the Ripper, though they, like I said, they really can't tell either or if he was just practicing to begin with, or if he had not been practicing and that this was actually like his third murder kind of thing. They just really didn't know. They were they were really just in the dark over all of this. So her name was actually Mary Ann Nichols. So Miss Mary Ann was the middle child of 3 children. And really, there's not much we know too much about her that time period, except that she was christened in 1851. She was married at 18 and ended up having 5 children with her husband. But she did separate from her husband because there was a possible idea of that he'd been unfaithful. Rude. Fortunately, she was really known around the area to be a drunk and a prostitute. So alcohol was like the name of the game for many of these women, it seemed to be. She was found at about 3:40 in the morning by a carman. So what I'm thinking is like that's a driver. So she was found by this guy, and which obviously he wasn't expecting to see. And she was laying on her back with her eyes open. Her throat was cut, and her dress was pulled up above her knees. And then they continued to further examine her. And on both sides of her face, she had bruising, which means she could have been punched, slapped, or even that was used as an anchor for when he was cutting her throat. And once again, these cuts were so deep they did reach her spinal cord. And there was a huge wound that was about 2.5 inches wide. Like wide. I'm not talking about wide this way. I'm talking about wide this way. That was very jagged, and it went from one side of her abdomen all the way to the other. And there's some varying other cuts along her body, and they were about 3 inches in length. It seems like as the murders go on, they get more and more gruesome. They really do. They started to believe that the guy that was committing these murders had at least some basic knowledge of, the human anatomy, because of the way that the murders were performed and then the extra things. Though at this point in time, no organs were missing. And a Dr. Llewellyn did do basically what we would call is the autopsy on the woman, and that's where he decided that, yep, she was definitely murdered. I love how they kind of like figure out, yeah, she was definitely murdered. I'm not going to inflict, like, be able to inflict, like, the previous, one of the first murders, or one of the other murders 39 times. I'm not going to be able to inflict 39 stab wounds, like, actual, like, gruesome stab wounds, life-threatening stab wounds to myself. I'm just not going to be able to do that, because at a certain point in time, you're losing blood and you're not going to be able to do it. Especially the one to the heart. Do you know how hard that sternum is? He was driving with some force to get down. And they did say that all these wounds, like during investigation, the direction of the wounds were coming like straight down, like it was over top of them. And like I said, she had no organs missing, and she was presumed dead. And once again, this was a murder. They looked around, they talked to people, still nothing. No real leads on this. They were having a terrible time. Just a week or so later, a little over a week later, September 8th of 1888, a fourth body was found. Like, they're just piling up here. And this body was of Annie Chapman. Now, Annie Chapman's father was known military, and he was also not just London military, but he was also Windsor military. Her parents were actually not married when she was born, but they did end up getting married after her sibling was born. So they were sticking it out. But again, like some of the other women we have talked about, alcohol was a weakness for her. And it was a big weakness. But her alcoholism started really, really young, and her siblings did try to help her cope with the alcoholism, and she was doing pretty well. She actually ended up overcoming it for a little while because she became a mom. She got married, she became a mom, and she focused on her children. One of her children, her son, was actually disabled, and he ended up going to a home for disabled children, because back then I don't think they really knew too much of how to take care of certain disabilities, so these homes had more of insight on it. But even then, it was early on some of the things that they were learning about. So her son went to a home, an institution, which was specifically for the children like him. But sadly, one of her daughters actually ended up passing away from meningitis, which this sent her on a spiral. She was just a mess. And so naturally she delved back into her drinking, and drinking heavily. This led to the separation of her husband and herself, because he didn't want to be around her when she was drinking, and he didn't want their surviving daughter to be around her when she was drinking as well. So Annie decided to relocate to Notting Hill. And we talked about this. Remember how Notting Hill was in that movie Notting Hill? It was very romanticized. Well, in I think my previous one that my camera ended up shutting off and had to do a voiceover. But in that one, Notting Hill was a impoverished type area where drugs and prostitution was very prominent in that area, and so that's where Annie ended up going to. People said that she was depressed, that she had lost her will to live. I mean, she had been through a lot, and she was just heartbroken. I mean, any mom would be heartbroken over a child passing away. That's very, very normal. She was grieving, and she had lost her will to live, and she had fallen back into her old habits of drinking, and and her husband left, and the kid left, so she was just not having a very good moment. She was not living her best life at this point in time. And sadly, she was out during the times, early morning hours, when Jack the Ripper was on the loose. Her body was found in the wee morning hours, much like the other ones. Actually, like all of the other ones. Remember how I said, like, the murders started amping up and got more and more gruesome? Yeah. Don't say I didn't warn you. Primer, we're going to go ahead and use NYX Plump Right Back. So this one was next level. This murder was next level for sure. She was found positioned lewdly. Her legs were propped up, like her knees were bent and her legs were propped up. And her body was in a different place than her head was. Her head was found about 6 inches or so further from a step to another building, so like a couple feet away from her body. So if that's what he was practicing for, decapitation in the past, which it kind of seems like when you're reading and talking about it, how deep his stab wounds were, it kind of seems like that's where he was headed with all of what he was trying to do. It said that her face was like really, really swollen. And that could have been from everything that was going on. It could have been from just swelling post-mortem of being decapitated. It was bruised. Her abdomen was cut open, like not just a jagged line. It was actually cut open, and part of her uterus and part of her bladder had been removed. So again, this goes to the people thinking like, oh yeah, this is someone who has knowledge of the body or the anatomy and knows what he's doing. So maybe he's a doctor. Maybe he's someone like that who knows about this kind of stuff. And so they're just progressing on this concept of what they know about him, or what they think they know about him. So we're going to be using Too Faced Born This Way multi-use sculpting concealer in the 3 shades that I usually use it in, and it's Porcelain, Swan, and Nude. And then we're also going to be using the Too Faced Born This Way foundation, and that's also in the shade Nude. Again, I've talked about loving how it's so easy to grab a shade, because once, even though they bring up a new formula or a different product that is for complexion, if you're nude in all of their stuff. You're not just like trying to guess the type of color you are. Now here we go. This one I'm going to have to read so that you guys can really understand this. So I'm going to pump that on there. I'm going to start where I need the most coverage and work it in there, but once I get this applied on here, I'm going to read this, because on September 27th, much like many serial killers, Jack the Ripper was becoming very, very cocky. So much so that he decided to send a letter, and the letter was addressed to the London Central News Press. I'm going to go ahead and just read this letter to you. This is the actual letter that was addressed to the news agency. Dear boss, I keep hearing that the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I have laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track. The joke about the leather apron gave me real fits. I am down on whores, and I shan't quit ripping till I get buckled. Grand work the last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal. How can they catch me now? I love my work and want to start again. You will soon hear of me with my funny little games. I saved some of the proper red stuff in a ginger beer bottle over the last job to write with, when it went thick like glue, and I can't use it. Red ink is fit enough, I hope, ha ha. The next job I do, I shall clip the lady's ear off and send to the police officers. Just for a jolly, wouldn't you? Keep this letter back until I do a bit more work. Then give it out straight. My knife's so nice and sharp. I want to get to work right away, if I get a chance. Good luck, yours truly, Jack the Ripper. Don't mind me giving the trade name. P.S. Wasn't good enough to post this letter before I got all the red ink off my hands. Curse it. No luck yet. They say I'm a doctor now. Ha ha. And that was the actual letter that was sent to this news agency. And they do become quite cocky, especially when they've gotten away with things for some time. And he had gotten away with things for a while now. And people were just like, this guy just sent out this thing. Okay, he had no interest in stopping. He was very much into his little games, as he said, his funny little games. I can't imagine being the news person that read this. I mean, I'm sure it was horrifying. But that's how he got the name Jack the Ripper. He named himself. On September 30th of 1888, 2 bodies of 2 local prostitutes were found. Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes. Elizabeth Stride had not been mutilated, but I can't say the same for Catherine. This is by far the worst one that he had done at all. Before I get into further details, I'm going to go ahead and finish up my concealer. And I'm going to set it down. I'm going to show you what I'm setting it down with. And then we're going to go into the details. We're going to dive head first into this. I'm going to take my little puff here, my little triangle puff here. And I'm going to use the Morphe Bake and Set Setting Powder in Brightening Pink. So not much is said about Elizabeth's early years, but it is said that she took to prostitution pretty early on in life, and it was just easy way to make money. She did have 1 child, but sadly she was born still, and that took a toll on Elizabeth. And she had also contracted in her profession some venereal diseases and had been treated a couple of times for those. Elizabeth did end up getting married, but from that marriage there was no children. There was no children that progressed. Maybe after the stillborn and the venereal diseases, maybe she couldn't have any kids. And she had also had a boyfriend off and on for about 3 years up until her murder. So Elizabeth's body was found once again in the early morning hours. At the rest of my face, I'm going to use the Ethereal powder by Too Faced. It's one of my favorites. It's my go-to. And I'm going to use the one size puff to set it all down. When she was found laying on her side. Feet were also, she was found laying on her side against the wall, and her feet were also found against the wall. So maybe like all snugged up against the wall, almost like she was a vagrant that had fallen asleep. And I mean, little did they know that she wasn't, but because they would just pass her on the street, she'd fallen asleep. And she actually only suffered 1 fatal stab wound to her neck, her carotid artery. And she was like, and then she had passed away. Like I said, that out of all his murders, that one was probably the least gruesome. But he did decide to take it out on the other young lady. Like I said, don't say I did not warn you, and I won't be posting a picture of this, but there is a picture of it on the web, and I was just, because doing all this research, you look and look and look for all the information, because I want to bring as much information as I can to you guys. And it's pretty. I've seen one where from the crime scene, and one after they had stitched her up for like burial purposes, and neither of them are good, I'll tell you that. And I'm going to go ahead, before I get into details, and I'm just going to bronze up my face with some butter bronzer, and then I'm going to jump back into the Dominique Cosmetics transition palette, and probably one of the latte ones as well for a blush. So we're moving on to a Miss Catherine et al.'s, the second of the two prostitutes that were actually found, person, victim, out of probably all of his. Like I had said before, this was no joke. Like, he had taken it to the next level. Her terribly mutilated body had been found early that day, and I'll give you a little backstory on her as well. She was born in Wolverhampton. Then her and her family came over to London later on. At 15, both her parents passed away, leaving her with her and her 3 siblings, and they were sent to like a workhouse, and that was what they would do with basically children that really couldn't provide for themselves. So they were offered the ability to provide for themselves, but also have lodging and housing, to be able to take care of themselves. Unfortunately, that's just very, very sad that they would have had to take care of themselves, but at least they had the opportunity to take care of themselves. And then later on, she quickly developed a little ability to steal, and that was not very happy. That didn't make employers very thrilled with her, that she had a little bit of sticky fingers, okay? So she, needless to say, left doing any type of work for the workhouse and ended up going into prostitution. She was just trying to make ends meet for her family and, her siblings, and this was just something that ended up leading to her ultimate demise, to be honest. And she was in the wrong place at the wrong time, unfortunately for her. I'm going to use my Lash Princess, and this is the Curl and Volume. You guys know this is like my all-time favorite. I'm going to curl my lashes, and then I'm going to put this on and continue telling you about this. So, Miss Catherine was found brutally, and when I say brutally, I mean brutally mutilated, like horrifically mutilated. I don't know if this was like because this was he knew this was going to be his last murder or what, but this was the most horrific murder that he had definitely done at all. Alright, here we go. So she was found lying on her back, and her clothes were above her stomach area, so revealing her pretty much to the world. And not just that, revealing what Jack had done. Because he was not ashamed of his work, otherwise he wouldn't have, well, one, he wouldn't be doing it, and he wouldn't be bragging about it to the newspaper. She had been disfigured beyond what anybody else had been disfigured. Like, she was next level, complete and total. It was horror. It was true and utter horror. I cannot imagine the person who came across it. Well, so her face and body were mutilated. And they weren't just mutilated a little bit, they were mutilated a whole lot. And this was, like I said, I cannot imagine. I'm so stalling on this because it is incredibly horrendous. Just horrendous of what she went through. And this is the ColourPop liner. And I'm going to put it on my inner waterline, and this is in the shade Honey Dude. Her neck was also, her face was mutilated, her neck was slit, and she had been disemboweled. Not just that, but as you continue on learning about exactly what transpired, first of all, her body was still warm. So the fact is that he probably, Jack the Ripper had to work excessively fast to do all of these things and not get caught, and for the body to be warm still. She was disemboweled to the point where her intestines, part of her intestines was cut off and laid purposefully in between like her side area over here, and another part was actually drugged from her stomach and draped over her shoulder like a shawl. And like he said in the letter, he held true. Part of her ear and lobe had been cut off. This is the Lippie color in Parker. It's Colourpop. Her eyes had been cut in different areas, like her eyelids and then like underneath her eyes, and it was to the extreme that it was exposing the actual area, like the socket area. Nose had been cut into the nostrils, from like here into the nostrils, disfiguring that area as well. He had also cut into her cheeks here that led directly into her mouth, so she had like holes into her mouth as well. Her left kidney had been completely removed from her body, and the cause of death was actually, I mean, any of these things would kill her, but they deemed the cause of death was actually the stab wound to the artery in her neck, and so she was bleeding out. And I wonder, I hope that she was already passed on while all of these horrific things that were going on to her, but I don't know. To who could be Jack the Ripper, I'm going to name a couple of them. I'm going to name a bunch of them, and then I'm going to go into a few of them as to why they thought that these guys might be him. There was Montague, think of Romeo and Juliet. Montague, John Druitt. I can't say this name very well, so just go with me. Syrian, Klasowski, Michael Ostrong, John Pizer, James Thomas Sadler, Francis Dumplety, Aaron Kosminski. Now, they believed Aaron was a really big possible suspect because he was an excessively skilled barber and hairstylist, so he knew how to wield like a razor, and that could be transferred into wielding a knife. He also was just like really hated women. He just like really, really hated women, and he had homicidal tendencies. So those things there mixed with that kind of made him a really big suspect. Not just that, but his DNA was found on Catherine Edow's shawl. You know, the lady we just talked about, who was the most gruesome and brutal of all of the killings. Yeah, his DNA was found on her shawl. And so naturally they thought, okay, this guy could be a really prime suspect for this murder because of his obvious, there's something there. But then again, he was a hairstylist and barber, so he could have just cut her hair and some form of his DNA, maybe he clipped his nail or cut himself or something, and that got on his on her shawl. But he was later sent to an asylum because of his mental illnesses, and he died not long after. Then there was Frances Craig. Frances's wife was believed to be a prostitute, but not telling him, kind of like an undercover type prostitute, to where she was doing this and getting extra money. And it was said that he was planning her murder, but was possibly killing other prostitutes to kind of, and other women to kind of cover up when he did kill her. But the one that stuck out the very, very most was Walter Richard Sickett. who not only claimed to be Jack the Ripper, but his DNA was found at multiple different crime scenes that had to do with Jack the Ripper. Styxx was born in Munich in 1860, so he wouldn't have been very old if he was doing these murders. He would have been, what, 28? He came over with his family to London in 1869. He was known for painting prostitutes, and many people believe that in these paintings there are symbols and clues to the Jack the Ripper murders that he painted into them, and in such a manner that only the murderer would have known. Like when we interview people now and say, okay, well, they gave details that only the murderer would know. That's kind of how this was. He was painting these pictures, and he was doing things that was not released into the big wide world of news and the press, and he knew these things, and his DNA was there, so they strongly believe that Walter is Jack the Ripper. There was another thing that they really truly believed, and you know how we make profiles for murderers nowadays? Well, this was definitely a part of their profile, but they weren't really calling it back then. They were just kind of like, okay, this is what he did, and this is what he did, and this is what maybe this and that and the other thing. They believed that he would have been an impotent man, and Walter was impotent due to many surgeries, and that this is how he would get his sexual gratifications. And because there being so many suspects, and there was DNA from another gentleman on one of the victims, one of the most gruesome crimes and murders out of all of them, you know, they don't have the technology and the ability like we do now to really pick apart everything, but they dang sure were trying, and this was a huge investigation. You could probably only imagine, because it was in this one area, there were multiple murders, and they kept trying to figure it out. But they did come to, and even up to like, even in the 1970s now, they believed that Walter Styxx was Jack the Ripper, because he was just the most closely involved with the situation of the best match, per se. So, but they've never really been able to truly prove without a shadow of doubt that this was the person that did it. So I'm going to go ahead and set my makeup down with some Milani Make It Last setting spray. You guys know I love this stuff. I use it all the time. Use my fan to dry it down. So what do you guys think about this case? I know it's a well-known case, but I did not know the details that I went into about the case. And you can definitely look up the pictures if you really, really want to. But what are your thoughts? Because I know I covered over a lot of the victims and a lot of the scenes, but because of the lack of real information and knowledge of who this man was, was he this Walter Styxx man? Was he one of the other ones that were listed? Or was he someone totally different that they had no clue, and he just ended up dying of maybe old age? And it's really not something we'll ever really know. Thank you for listening to my story. I'll leave my Instagram information down below per usual, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and also hit the like button if you enjoyed watching this video or listening to it. I have a habit of doing that too, just listening to things, especially when I'm doing investigation on my next case. I do have a habit of just playing things and listening to them as I'm doing things around the house. But one of my videos, as always, be safe out there. People crazy. Take care of each other and yourself. And I'll see you next Tuesday. Take care.